peaks of Mount Olympus were gently illuminated by the first light of morning. The sun was slowly rising behind the mountain, its golden rays seeping through the clouds. A light breeze played through the stone courtyards of the gods' homes, gently rustling the leaves of small flowers. At these heights the rhythm of time flowed very differently from that of humans. Seconds and minutes did not feel like they did, but rather centuries. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was walking in her garden in the calm of this morning. The soft grass beneath her feet trembled lightly with each step, and the scent of fresh flowers mingled in the air. Her eyes were drawn to her reflection in the small pool at the center of the garden. The smile on her face carried a hint of curiosity mixed with gentle serenity. Today, Olympus seemed quieter than usual. Most of the gods had, with the first light of dawn, immersed themselves in their own affairs, making small observations about the human world or getting lost in eternity. The only being to disturb this calm was Ares, the god of war. Ares was wandering on the other side of the mountain, across the wide rocky plains that stretched between the sky and the clouds. Observing what was happening in the human world was a matter of curiosity and passion for him. The fire of war always burned lightly in his heart, but today it was mixed with a strangely different feeling, a kind of uneasy curiosity. Perhaps the silence of Olympus gave a kind of calm that his strong heart had never been accustomed to. Aphrodite's walk in her garden and Ares' observations were connected by invisible threads. Unaware of each other, the two gods were walking on the edge of the same thoughts in the same morning light. Aphrodite's eyes occasionally wandered to the horizon, as if sensing Ares' presence, but she quickly looked away to make sure no one noticed. Ares, on the other hand, unconsciously sought the source of this beauty, wavering between the voice of war in his heart and a soft curiosity. On the rocky paths of Olympus, birds slowly began to chirp, and the wind drifted like a gentle melody. Silence was not just absence, but the voice of anticipation, a slow thrill. For centuries, the gods had observed one another and played their games, but today, in the calm of this morning, everything moved much slower and gentler. As Aphrodite caressed the petals of a flower, Ares watched the shape of a cloud in the sky. Each was in their own world, yet at the same time, aware of the other's presence. This morning, high on Olympus, a silent dance of love and war had begun. No one noticed, but the wind, the leaves, and the birds whispered the first steps of this dance. And so, preparations began for the gods, games, intrigues, and touches on the human world. Everything quietly waited in the calm light of morning. Chapter 2. Sparks in the human world. Ares slowly descended from the peaks of Olympus toward the heart of the human world. As he moved over forests, rivers, and small villages, he observed the traces of war and chaos. The courage, fears, and hopes of humans created a picture that was both fascinating and difficult for him to understand. Every conflict, every small fight, left a spark in Ares' heart. Yet this spark was much softer than the fire of anger and destruction he was used to. At the same time, Aphrodite wandered through the human world, spreading the beauty of small moments. She saw the quiet instant when a couple joined hands, felt as if lightly touching the words a mother whispered to her child. Every small act of kindness made her power even more alive, yet also created a strange unease in her heart. For every beauty shone in the shadow of war, and Ares' presence made these shadows even more pronounced. Their first encounter happened in an unexpected silence. In the midst of a conflict, as Ares watched the fear and courage of humans, he saw Aphrodite smile gently. At that moment, time seemed to slow. A flutter stirred in Ares' heart. The war and anger in him gradually gave way to curiosity and careful admiration. Aphrodite noticed Ares' gaze but did not look away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if sending the message, "I am here, but no one will notice." After this first encounter, they began to notice each other's traces in the human world. While Ares observed humans on battlefields, he saw Aphrodite sowing seeds of love and kindness, noticing how every smile and gentle touch softened the harshness of war, even if only for a moment. Aphrodite, in turn, felt the warmth left behind by Ares' shadow, realizing that even the chaos he created in the human world carried a certain kind of allure. This encounter had, without their awareness, become a point of attraction for both of them. Among humans, small conflicts and fleeting joys caught their attention, preparing them to know each other more closely. Between the calm of Olympus' peaks and the chaos of the human world, the first sparks of love and war silently glimmered. Chapter 4. Touching the Humans. As Ares wandered through the human world, he observed the small preparations for war around a village. People were having disagreements among themselves, sometimes acting with fear, sometimes with courage. Watching these scenes, Ares once again realized both the power and the destructive nature of war. But today, something else caught his attention: Aphrodite's touches. Aphrodite was spreading small acts of kindness within the village. She held a child's hand, stroked the head of an elderly woman, and caught the sparks of love in the eyes of a young couple. Every movement, with a gentle and careful touch, left small but lasting marks on human hearts. Seeing this effect, Ares felt his fire of war give way to curiosity and admiration. Their first encounter in the human world happened in a small village square. As Ares walked among the people, he noticed Aphrodite smiling softly and helping a child. This simple but meaningful action captured his attention. As he approached slowly, the sound of war in his heart shifted into a gentler rhythm. The hope and love he saw in the eyes of humans gave him a serenity he had never known. When Aphrodite noticed Ares, she did not look away. Instead, she slightly tilted her head and sent him a silent greeting. This greeting created a connection without the need for words. Love and war, two opposing forces, were slowly touching each other in this quiet moment. When Aphrodite returned to Olympus, she sensed the silent messages the gods might have sent her. Her beauty, the power of love, and her touches on humans drew not only the attention of humans, but also that of the gods. With a slight smile she thought, everything becomes clear with time. The small sparks in the human world were both entertainment and a test for her. As the wind caressed the leaves of the trees, the gods' hidden glances and silent games echoed along the rocky paths of Olympus. Every small movement, every whisper, seemed to herald the great moment when love and war would merge. And so, these little intrigues and games slowly shaped the destinies of both gods and humans. Chapter 5. The Intersection of Love and War. By midday, small conflicts in the human world were slowly growing. On the lands near a village, people were having disagreements among themselves, swinging between fear and courage. As Ares watched these scenes from the sky, he once again felt the power and destructiveness of war. But this time, he had a silent observer with him: Aphrodite. Aphrodite was sowing seeds of love and compassion in human hearts, easing fear with her gentle touches. A strange balance emerged between Ares observing the fire of war and Aphrodite's soft influence. Every movement, every glance echoed in both the human world and on Olympus. Their first great encounter began like a silent conflict in the middle of a battlefield. As Ares tested the courage and determination of humans, Aphrodite softened their fears. These two opposing forces touched each other while also diminishing each other's effects. The anger and passion for war in Ares' heart were softened by Aphrodite's gentle touches, and Aphrodite's compassion became stronger and more distinct through Ares' determination. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The wind ceased, the birds were silent, and only their quiet interaction and the small movements in the human world remained. Ares slowly approached Aphrodite. When their eyes met, they recognized both each other's strength and vulnerability. This awareness further intensified the attraction between them. A balance was established between the noise of war and the silence of love. Humans, unknowingly, acted under the influence of these two gods. Courage and hope mingled with fear and doubt, creating small miracles. By acknowledging each other's presence, Ares and Aphrodite learned that love and war could exist simultaneously. This was a small but important change for both Olympus and the human world. Chapter 6. Finding Peace. As the day ended, the peaks of Olympus were bathed in shades of orange and pink. The sun slowly retreated behind the mountain, filling the sky with a quiet serenity. After leaving small effects in the human world, Ares and Aphrodite returned to Olympus. They now better understood each other's strength and intentions, and had formed a silent bond. The other gods on Olympus noticed their changing state. Zeus' gaze carried a hint of approval and curiosity. Hera's jealous eyes were now softened with gentle curiosity. The games of the gods seemed to have ended, but in reality, the balance between love and war had been quietly and continuously established. Ares had left behind some of the harshness of war, and had come to understand his heart more deeply under Aphrodite's gentle influence. Aphrodite, in turn, had learned to balance the power of love with the severity of war, and chose to observe both humans and gods more carefully. The wind lightly brushed the rocky paths of Olympus, birds chirped softly, and the last rays of the sun filtered through the leaves. Silence was no longer emptiness, it was the voice of peace, and the completion of a cycle. Ares and Aphrodite stood slowly beside each other, enjoying the quiet understanding and deep bond they had formed. High on Olympus, love and war could now coexist. Humans and gods lived under the influence of this silent balance without noticing it, yet every step, every glance was slowly woven into the endless rhythm of time. And thus, the story of love and war ended with a quiet and profound peace, just as the first light of morning gradually faded into the day. Chapter 1. The Silent Shadow of Olympus. The peaks of Olympus shone with a faint golden glow as the first light of day appeared. The rays of the sun fell upon the rocky surface of the mountain, glimmering softly. The sky was slowly painted with delicate shades of pink and orange. The air was silent yet carried a deep calmness. The wind drifted gently only through the leaves, and the birds sang the first melody of the morning in soft tones. Ares walked slowly along the high stone paths of Olympus. Unlike before, today he was not only watching the wars of the human world, but also observing the effects of love and compassion. The fire of war in his heart was still alive, yet now this fire was unknowingly softening, for beside him was a quiet force, Aphrodite. Aphrodite walked in a flower-filled area of her garden. Every step was as gentle as a melody, lightly touching the earth. The blades of grass beneath her feet responded softly to her steps, and the colors of the flowers shimmered faintly. Her eyes caught her own silhouette reflected on the surface of the pool. This morning, within the silence and peace, she was enjoying a moment far from the games of the gods. The silence of Olympus was filled with the quiet observations of other gods. From his high throne, Zeus watched the two forces, love and war, drawing closer to one another. Sometimes he looked with mild curiosity, and sometimes with careful vigilance, for these two opposing powers could change the balance of Olympus through their impact on both the human and divine worlds. Hera, on the other hand, eyed Aphrodite with jealous and curious glances, trying to sense the small games and intrigues at play. Ares and Aphrodite were approaching each other on Olympus without realizing it. Before their eyes could meet, it was only the wind and the silence that brought them together. Every step, every breath was like a quiet communication, as if time slowed whenever they sensed each other's presence. As Ares walked along the rocky paths, he felt the echoes of conflicts rising in the human world, observing the tremors each small event caused in his heart. But today, there was something different. Aphrodite's silent touch and presence softened these tremors, lightening the harsh rhythm of war. Every occurrence in the human world left an echo within him, merging with the power of love. Aphrodite, meanwhile, walking among the flowers in the garden of Olympus, felt the effects of love and compassion, knowing she touched the hearts of humans and gods alike. But this morning she noticed another force as well, Ares' silent and deep gaze. This gaze carried the fire of war yet also held curiosity and admiration. With a slight smile, Aphrodite bowed her head and greeted him silently. It was enough for two opposing forces to understand one another without words. The silence of Olympus was filled with the quiet observations of other gods. From his high throne, Zeus watched the two forces, love and war, drawing closer to one another. Sometimes he looked with mild curiosity, and sometimes with careful vigilance, for these two opposing powers could change the balance of Olympus through their impact on both the human and divine worlds. Hera, on the other hand, eyed Aphrodite with jealous and curious glances, trying to sense the small games and intrigues at play. Ares and Aphrodite were approaching each other on Olympus without realizing it. Before their eyes could meet, it was only the wind and the silence that brought them together. Every step, every breath was like a quiet communication, as if time slowed whenever they sensed each other's presence. As Ares walked along the rocky paths, he felt the echoes of conflicts rising in the human world, observing the tremors each small event caused in his heart. But today, there was something different. Aphrodite's silent touch and presence softened these tremors, lightening the harsh rhythm of war. Every occurrence in the human world left an echo within him, merging with the power of love. Aphrodite, meanwhile, walking among the flowers in the garden of Olympus, felt the effects of love and compassion, knowing she touched the hearts of humans and gods alike. But this morning she noticed another force as well, Ares, silent and deep gaze. This gaze carried the fire of war yet also held curiosity and admiration. With a slight smile, Aphrodite bowed her head and greeted him silently. It was enough for two opposing forces to understand one another without words. As the hours of the day passed, the wind began to stir slowly, and birds flew with light melodies. Ares and Aphrodite quietly sensed each other's presence, while the other gods slowly set their games in motion. Zeus measured their strength and influence. Hera watched the intrigues with jealous but attentive eyes. Although Olympus seemed calm and peaceful, this silence was a sign of preparation and subtle games. Within this silent shadow, the first sparks of love and war glimmered gently. Small miracles in the human world were shaped by the quiet influence of the gods, and on the rocky paths of Olympus, the balance of love and war was being established with a silent rhythm. And thus, a new story began, both ancient and new, both quiet and deep, filled with both love and war. Chapter 2: The Deep Silence of Olympus. The wind was still blowing with the same softness. As Ares walked beside Aphrodite, he found himself surprised by how much peace this quiet simplicity brought him. For him, there were two kinds of silence in the world: the heavy, mold-scented silence that settled among broken spears after a battle, and this warm, delicate silence created by Aphrodite's presence. The first silence opened wounds, the second healed them. As they climbed the stone steps of Olympus together, the sky had shifted to the palest shade of purple, and the clouds stretched across the horizon in soft, cotton-like trails. The light of day was nearly gone. Even in the realm of the gods there was a heaviness that signaled the approach of night. Aphrodite stopped when they reached the final step. The clouds beneath their feet moved slowly, like a living creature breathing. "Ares," she said gently, "that moment today when we helped the humans, you felt it, didn't you? Something greater is coming." Ares felt the familiar tension he always experienced when the goddess looked at him. Who had he been before he became the god of war? What had he felt? He could no longer remember. "Yes," he said, "but I don't know if it will come from peace, or from chaos." Aphrodite smiled softly. "Sometimes they are the same thing." High above them, beyond a point neither could see, a pair of eyes watched them, not with jealousy, rather with curiosity and calculation. Even in the silence of the gods, hidden thoughts whispered. Every union, every closeness created ripples in the divine balance. And each moment, Ares and Aphrodite walked side by side, a subtle shift of light appeared in the power lines of Olympus. That shift had begun to catch the attention of certain gods. Aphrodite and Ares walked toward a hidden terrace on the western side of Olympus. It was a place known to only a few gods. The sky appeared wider here, and faraway human cities could be seen as faint glimmers of light. The wind carried a coolness that made every feeling deeper. Aphrodite stepped to the edge of the terrace and let her feet hover above the clouds. Ares followed behind her and stood at her side. Aphrodite spoke quietly. "Today we touched the hearts of humans. You don't realize it, Ares, but even war sometimes serves peace." Ares raised his eyebrows slightly. "I only prevented disorder from spreading. I didn't want another conflict to break out." Aphrodite turned her head toward him, her eyes still gentle. "And that is why you are changing." For the first time, Ares tried to name the emotion rising within him. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps a longing to be understood, or perhaps it was simply his spirit softening under Aphrodite's presence. At that moment, a faint light flickered in the sky. Neither Aphrodite nor Ares reacted, at least not outwardly, but the being within the light continued to watch them. It was a figure who moved silently among the gods, hidden within the shadows. Hermes. For Hermes, knowledge was more valuable than gold. And what he had just seen was not something he would keep to himself. Aphrodite gently touched the upper part of Ares's armor. The metal was cold, but her touch carried warmth. "Come with me," she said softly. "Where?" "Down to the mortal world. Something will change there tonight. Can't you feel it?" Ares narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. The lights of the cities shimmered like tiny, trembling dots in the night, but the energy of crowds preparing for conflict, of young men ready to fight, of frightened tribes on the brink of war, those vibrations were far clearer. Ares felt them deep within himself. "I feel it," he said. "But why do you speak so calmly?" Aphrodite smiled. Because sometimes preventing a war is more important than creating a love. Ares nodded. Then let's go. And so the two gods, carrying the powers of both war and love within them, descended silently from the sky. The clouds parted gently to let them pass, the wind brushed through their hair and garments, and the night sky carried them as though through a tunnel carved out of darkness. The world was unaware of the gods who were approaching. But soon, everyone would know. On the earth below, tension between two tribes at the edge of a small valley was rising quickly. For years they had argued over water sources, but tonight was different. Tonight, both tribes felt something beyond fear, as if an invisible hand was slowly stoking their anger. As Ares approached, he heard the tension in the air like a sharp ringing note. Something here is provoking them, he said. Aphrodite nodded. And I cannot sense the source of that provocation. That's bad. They both knew this was not normal. The hostility between the tribes might be natural, but the intensity of tonight's hatred felt as if it was being fed from outside. Ares took a deep breath. Someone is playing a game with us. A faint shadow crossed Aphrodite's face. A god? Ares' eyes darkened. Yes. A god who's been following our trail. Just then, Hermes appeared lightly in a corner of the sky. There was a mischievous glint in his eyes and that same unreadable smile on his face. You're not alone, he said softly, and I have a request for you. Ares' spear glimmered sharply for a moment. I knew you were watching us. Hermes shrugged. You draw far too much attention. That wasn't my choice. Aphrodite stepped forward. What do you want, Hermes? Before approaching, Hermes glanced around, then spoke in a whisper. The turmoil in this valley wasn't started by you. And not by me. But someone knew you would come down here, and someone is preparing to ignite this war right in front of you. Ares' expression hardened. Who? Hermes' smile faded. A god. But it's too early to say which one. However, I can tell you this. This is only the beginning. Aphrodite and Ares exchanged a brief look. Love and war, two forces that had long brushed against each other, were now being pulled together into a growing darkness. And the story was only just beginning. Chapter 2. The Deep Silence of Olympus. Continuation, more descriptive. Night had begun to settle over the earth like a heavy velvet curtain. The peaks rising on either side of the valley appeared as thin silhouettes drawn in the pale glow of the moon. The leaves of the trees answered the cool breath of the wind with gentle rustles. Each leaf brushed against another, as if whispering secrets in the dark. As Ares and Aphrodite drifted down from the sky with feather-light grace, the night seemed to deepen with every step they took. The clouds carried them like silent guides, and the countless stars of the heavens shimmered like drowsy eyes watching the passage of gods. The moment Ares' feet touched the ground, he immediately surveyed the surroundings. The earth still held the warm breath it had gathered during the day, yet the air trembled with unease. It felt as though an invisible tremor was rising from beneath the soil, multiplying the impatience rooted in human hearts and swelling their fears. Aphrodite walked toward a pale pool of water resting in the center of the valley. The surface rippled gently as if caressed by the unseen hands of the moon. The goddess knelt and touched the surface. Her touch altered the vibration within the water. For a brief moment it grew clear, then darkened again. Something, Aphrodite murmured, her voice soft as though rising from the water itself, is squeezing the hearts of these mortals. This isn't ordinary fear. Ares looked toward the firelight rising from the camps of the two tribes. Flames climbed upward in restless reds and oranges, each spark like a nerve snapping under tension. Even the fire burned uneasily, as though it was feeding on anger rather than wood. Ares' voice echoed in a deep, steady tone. This hatred isn't natural. It's as if someone is fanning the flames, but secretly, unseen. Just then, the wind shifted. It carried with it the sounds of the valley, muffled arguments, strained breaths, the snap of a breaking twig, and the distant tremor of a war drum. These sounds carved thin cracks into the silence of the night. Aphrodite rose and came to stand beside Ares. When they stood together, the energy between them felt clearer than the darkness of the valley itself. Her presence softened the weight of the night, while his steadied the chaos swirling in the air. The goddess lifted her gaze to the stars. Someone is touching the fears of mortals, she said. But why? To start a war or to draw us here? Ares was silent for a moment before answering. There is someone following us, he said at last. I can feel them watching from inside the dark. The words had barely left his lips when a cool wave swept through the air, followed by a slight shift in shadow and a brief, bell-like tremor. Ares and Aphrodite turned their heads at the exact same moment. Hermes emerged from between the branches, but this time, he wasn't smiling. Shadows curled behind him as if recoiling, and even the moonlight seemed hesitant to fully illuminate him, outlining him in a faint, hesitant glow. As Hermes approached, the soft sound of his winged sandals was no louder than a feather brushing against dry leaves. "Don't rush," he said, his voice blending smoothly with the night. "What you're seeing in this valley is only the beginning." Aphrodite narrowed her eyes. "There are things you aren't telling us." Hermes tilted his head. "There are things I should tell you, but this isn't the moment." Ares stepped forward, and the earth trembled faintly beneath his feet. "Hermes, don't play games." Hermes drew a thin breath. "Ares, if you truly want the truth, someone led you here." This tension didn't rise on its own. A god has left a dark touch on mortal hearts. "I don't know the name yet, but I found traces," Aphrodite asked cautiously. "What kind of traces?" Hermes ran his fingers through the air. Starlight gathered at his fingertips like tiny sparks. Then that light twisted, darkened, and formed into a thin coil of smoke. The smoke curled like a black knot, releasing a low, throbbing hum. Ares seemed to recognize the symbol. "This is the mark of a hatred seed," Hermes nodded. "Yes, a god is feeding their fear to pull you down here. Someone is watching you, waiting for you." The wind paused. The leaves stilled. Even the fire's crackle from far away faded. The night seemed to hold its breath. Aphrodite whispered, "Why would someone target us?" Hermes's eyes glimmered, like two faint lights trapped within the darkness. "Because when the two of you stand together, the balance shifts. Love and war meeting on the same line, some gods don't like that." Ares opened his mouth to speak, but Aphrodite spoke first. "Who?" Hermes finally smiled. But it was thinner, wearier than ever before. "Time will reveal that. But I have a warning for you." The wind began to move again, a soft hum rolling across the treetops and mixing with Hermes's voice. "The conflict that will break out here tonight is only the shadow of the real battle. A curtain meant to draw you closer. If you disperse this shadow, then you will begin to see the true plan." Ares breathed heavily. "We'll scatter the shadow." Hermes stepped back and bowed his head. "What you do next is your choice. But know this, more than one pair of eyes is watching you." And with that, Hermes melted into the darkness like a silent wave, leaving behind nothing but the faintest whisper of feathers. As Ares and Aphrodite walked toward the center of the valley, the night had begun to look entirely different. The shadows of the trees were longer, the silence deeper, and the breaths of the people heavier. Everything was a sign that something was approaching. Aphrodite whispered softly, "Ares, are you ready?" Ares did not answer, but the determination in his eyes was strong enough to serve as an answer to all of Olympus. Love and war were walking side by side tonight. And the truth hidden within the darkness was coming toward them. Chapter 2. The Heart of the Night Valley. As Ares and Aphrodite moved deeper into the valley, the night descended upon them like a heavy shroud. With each step the earth darkened, and the trunks of the trees stretched into long thin shadows hanging from the darkness. The moon had slipped behind the clouds. The surroundings had become a darkness, pierced only by the flickering pale lights of fireflies. The soil beneath their feet gave way like a soft breath, slightly damp. Fallen leaves crackled with a deep, sorrowful sound under Ares' heavy steps. When Aphrodite walked, nature behaved differently toward her. The leaves did not crush beneath her feet, but instead seemed to gently pull away in respect, and even the shadows formed a thinner ring around her as if dancing. Aphrodite's hair caught the night breeze, and the wind lifted each strand as though telling its own story. There was a soft glow in her hair, like faint starlight. When that glow reflected on the sharp lines of Ares' dark red armor, it was as if the boundary between war and love melted into something unseen. The scents rising from the valley were changing. First came the calm, earthy smell of damp soil, then the sharpness of distant smoke mixed in. A little further, the hot, angry breath of fire became noticeable. And beneath that heat, there was the metallic, piercing scent of human fear, one Ares had never forgotten in thousands of years, nor wanted to forget. Even as Aphrodite sensed that scent, a quiet sadness touched her serene expression. For she knew that even fear carried its own story. Ares tensed the moment he sensed it. "I can feel the fear," he said. His voice was heavy, like an echo rising from the depths of a cavern. "And it isn't natural fear, it feels cultivated. As if someone has amplified it." Aphrodite touched Ares' arm. Her touch was like a warm drop melting the tension inside the god of war for a brief moment. "Someone might have left a dark shadow inside their hearts." Ares nodded slowly. "Whoever did this is no ordinary being. A god. And they're tracking us." Down in the valley, the camps of the two tribes were not side by side, but close enough to see one another. The fires on both sides burned fiercely. The yellow-orange glow of the flames cast sharp shadows on the tents and on the faces of the people. The flames flickered even without wind, trembling as if nudged by an invisible hand. Smoke rose upward but dispersed after only a short height, then sank back down, as if even the night sky refused to accept it and sent it back into the valley. When Aphrodite inhaled the scent of the smoke, her lips parted. "These fires," she said, "feel like they're being used to magnify fear. Even their light burns anxiously." Ares looked at the flames. "Everything is prepared for a war to break out, but something is still missing." Aphrodite met his eyes. "What is missing?" "The war cry," said Ares. "Someone is waiting to unleash it. A god is feeding the fear inside these people for that moment." Ares fell silent, and suddenly turned his head. A shadow had stirred faintly among the trees. A breeze could have passed. But Ares knew it was no mere wind. Aphrodite sensed it too. "The darkness is here," she whispered. "It's watching us." Just then, a sudden flash of light burst at the center of the valley. It was impossible to tell how brief it truly was, because the light was neither lightning nor a flare of fire. It was more like a momentary tear inside a darkness stretched and pulled by an invisible hand. Ares instantly raised his shield, and Aphrodite stepped behind him, yet her eyes were fixed on the faint change occurring at the glowing point. When the light vanished, a silhouette appeared at its center, Hermes. But this time, they couldn't fully see him. Only the faint, feather-like sound of his winged sandals, and a subtle vibration spreading through the trees. "I'm here," came Hermes' voice. But it wasn't coming from one place. It seemed to echo from the entire valley at once. The branches of the trees rustled for a brief moment, even though there was no wind. When Hermes stepped out from the shadows and became visible, Ares let out a deep breath. Another trick? This time, Hermes wasn't smiling. His face looked pale, as if covered by a mask woven from shadows. "No," he said. "Not this time. This is a warning." Before approaching, Aphrodite tested the air. "Hermes, what is this darkness? Who's doing this?" Hermes closed his eyes, waiting for a few seconds as though inhaling something unseen. Then he opened them and spoke. "The god who is stirring the anger in this valley knows you, knows your strength, knows your closeness, and fears it." Aphrodite whispered, "Who would fear us?" Hermes lifted his head. "What you transform and strengthen together. A war guided by love. Love protected by war. For some gods that is a threat." A storm-like expression crossed Ares' face. "Who is this god?" Hermes stepped back. "I can't say yet. But very soon, they will reveal themselves." As Ares stepped forward, the shadow across his face deepened. "Then, we'll reveal the darkness ourselves." Aphrodite touched Ares' arm, calming him. Her touch was softer than the night wind. "Ares, be patient. Darkness cripples those who rush toward it." Ares relaxed his shoulders, but the determination in his eyes did not fade. Hermes spoke once more. "The conflict that will erupt between the two tribes tonight, it's only a curtain. The real cause is hidden behind it. If you stop this war, you pull that curtain aside, and that god will see you more clearly." Ares' lips released a cold sentence. "And we'll see them." As Hermes faded back into the shadows, a heavy silence fell over the valley. A faint murmur drifted through the trees. The night took a deep breath, and the stars seemed to dim. Aphrodite lifted her gaze to the sky. "Ares, tonight, they will test not only the mortals but us as well." Ares tapped his spear lightly against the earth. "Then we'll pass the test." Aphrodite smiled. Together, and the two gods continued walking toward the heart of the darkness. The wind drifted slowly across the wide courtyard of Midas's palace. As the first light of morning struck the stone walls of the palace, a golden hue began to appear. It was as if even the sun rose over these lands with greater care, spreading its light more softly, more warmly, and with a velvety gentleness. Beyond the back garden of the palace stretched the ancient valleys of Phrygia. These valleys had stood there for thousands of years. Mountains had crumbled, civilizations had risen, even gods had fallen into silence with time. But the valleys had always carried the same breath. The earth here held a deep wisdom. As the wind passed through the slender bowed grasses, that wisdom whispered softly. Midas had woken early that morning. When he rose from sleep, there was a heavy silence in his chamber. Only the distant songs of birds and the faint clinking of the gold-embroidered lamps, stirred lightly by the breeze slipping through the curtains, could be heard. When he opened his eyes, everything seemed a little brighter to him, as if even the objects in the palace carried a different meaning that day. He rose slowly from his bed. The sound of his steps echoed through the spacious room, spreading as if into an even larger space. He paused for a moment and took a long, deep breath. The air carried the dampness of morning, but it comforted him. It reminded him that a new day had begun. When he looked out the window, he saw a thin layer of mist rising over the distant hills. The mist rested over the mountains like a white shawl. The forests below seemed to be preparing for a ritual that blessed the silence of the morning. Every tree, every leaf, every shadow stood in a calm rhythm, waiting for its next breath. Midas decided to go outside. As he walked through the palace corridors, the shadows slipping across the ancient carvings on the walls gave him a familiar feeling, the weight of the past. In every carving there was a story. In every stone, a memory. His ancestors, wars, lessons learned, mistakes made, victories won. All quietly accompanied the history Midas carried within himself. When he stepped outside, the wind brushed gently against his face. The touch was as tender as a hand resting on a cheek. The sun had not yet fully risen, but the warm colors spreading along the horizon whispered of what the day might bring. As he entered the palace garden, the dewdrops on the flowers glimmered. They were so clear that they seemed like tiny pieces of the sky that had fallen and settled on the petals. When some met the sunlight, they formed small rainbows, creating brief but dazzling flashes of color. The more Midas walked, the deeper he sank into his own thoughts. In the silence he could hear only his own breathing. But this silence was not a lonely one. On the contrary, it wrapped around him like a thick, soft blanket of peace. In the center of the garden stood a massive plane tree. This tree was a symbol for everyone living in the lands of Phrygia. Its roots stretched so deep that, according to belief, they reached the silent gods of the underworld. Its wide branches seemed to hold up the sky itself. Midas touched its trunk gently. Under his fingertips lay the stories of years. The tree carried a warm vibration, as if it were breathing. He sat down beneath it. The ground was soft. The birdsong was slowly increasing, forming a gentle rhythm. The rhythm was like a lullaby. One could not help but feel their thoughts slowing, their minds settling into calm. At that moment, something crossed Midas's mind. Gold. The symbol of power, the color of splendor, the substance desired in every corner of the world, yet at the same time, a source of loneliness, greed, and sometimes disaster. The shine of gold sometimes outshone even the sun, but shine did not always mean warmth. Midas knew this, or at least he thought he did. He did not yet know what fate was preparing for him. As the sky brightened further, the wind shifted. It carried with it a faint scent of pine. At the same time, the distant sound of a horse's hooves reached his ears. The sound broke his peaceful thoughts like a gentle call. He raised his head. In the distance he saw a silhouette approaching. A messenger. A young man carrying the red and white banners of the palace was riding swiftly. The steam from the horse's breath mixed with the morning air, forming a pale cloud. When the messenger stopped before Midas, there was a mix of worry and excitement on his face. "Your Majesty," he said, breathless. "A sign has come from the gods." Midas's eyebrows lifted slightly. Any sign from the gods was always both intriguing and dangerous. "What sign?" Midas asked, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. The messenger hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "A sign about gold, Your Majesty." A faint tremor stirred in Midas's heart. It felt as though a force rising from beneath the earth was pulling him inward. The wind suddenly stilled. The trees fell silent. The light in the sky turned to a paler shade. Even nature seemed to feel the weight of that sentence. Midas slowly rose to his feet. He took a deep, heavy breath. "Show me," he said. And thus the wheels of fate began to turn.